So now we're going to be talking about inverses of functions. So the main thing to remember is that the inverse functions, you switch the domain and range. So x, y is changing to y, x. Okay, you're switching the domain and the range. You're doing the opposite of everything. So where you would add before, now you're going to subtract. Also key to note that you have to write it as f to the minus 1 of x. This is how you write the inverse function. Okay, that is very important in your notation to make sure you are writing it like that. So if we think about what it means just in general, again, we're switching the domain and range. So -4 to -2 changes to -2, -4. This is going to be 0. This is going to be 1. Now if we talk about, is the inverse also a function? Yes, it is, because it's 1 to 1. Okay, each input has exactly one output. That's what makes it a function. Versus down here, okay, our function is what's called many to one. Many inputs go to one output, so that means when we switch it, one input goes to multiple outputs, which is where we have a problem. It can't be a function because one input has two outputs. Okay. So one thing to notice is that inverses are reflecting across the line y equals x, which again makes sense because that's what the definition says. The inverse says we flip the x and the y values, so they should be reflected across that line y equals x. So to find the inverse function, it's a really simple process. First thing you do, where they write f of x, you change it to y. Then you solve for x. Switch the x and the y, replace y with f to the -1 of x. So, this is your function. First step, replace f of x with y. Now you solve for y, so you subtract 4, divide by 3. That gets you to here. You've solved for x. Now you switch the x and the y, and then rewrite it as f to the -1 of x. It's the same process every time. Let's see if we can get to our own example here. Alright, so here we go. First step. Step 1. We change f of x to y. So y equals -2x plus 3. That's step 1. Now we have to solve for x. So it's solving for x. First thing we'll have to do is subtract the 3. So y minus 3 is equal to -2x. Then to solve for x, we have to divide by the -2. So y minus 3 divided by -2 is equal to x. That's step 2 done. We have solved for x. Step 3, we switch the x and the y. So x was by itself before, now y is by itself. So now it should be x minus 3 over -2. And the last step, replace y with f to the -1 of x. And we're done. If you, for whatever reason, need to graph this, your best bet is to break it up into these separate fractions. So you've got an invisible 1 there in front of that x, so you can break that up into -1/2 x, and then two negatives make it a positive 3 over 2, so that would be a little bit easier format for you to be able to graph. You can also model with inverse functions. Just the key thing with this is you do not switch your x and your y. So since they have specific meanings to these variables, instead of switching them at any point, all you do is solve for the other variable. So in this case, if we wanted to solve for t, we divide by 60, and that's it. Okay, there's no extra steps here, you just solve for the other variable. Okay, and then the key here, again, is that the domain of the inverse function is the same as the range of the original function, because we've switched the values around. The domain of the inverse is the range of the inverse function. So if our original equation is in terms of c, that means c is the range of the original function, so that would be your domain for your inverse function. But again, the important thing to recognize here is that when we're doing this, all we're doing is solving for the other variable. So you take w minus 600 equals -20t, solve for t, divide by negative 20. dw minus 600 over negative 20. I believe this reduces to negative 1 over 20w plus 30, I believe. Yeah, plus 30. So that's the key thing. This is the inverse function, okay? It's not anything more. We're not switching anything. We're just strictly solving for the other variable. I think that's the main other thing I wanted to cover here. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a refresher before your test. If you have any questions, specifically I know domain and range have been causing people a lot of problems, so please, please, please make sure you ask about these before your upcoming test.